Have you ever seen a car brand come out with something so strange that everyone just goes,
Huh?
but then somehow it becomes an icon, proving everyone wrong? Well, that's actually happened several times, and each time it's changed the course of the car world forever. Today, we're gonna dive into 10 of the most iconic cars that were first criticized, but then became trendsetters. And I think some of these are gonna surprise you. First up, the Lexus LFA. Today, most of us love the LFA. I mean, how could you not? It's a gorgeous V10 monster that was honestly way ahead of its time. The car was meticulously built, with top-of-the-line tech, loads of carbon fiber, and a Yamaha engine. But the company lost money on every single one they sold. And that's not the most shocking part. You see, LFA production only ran from 2011 to 2013. But as of 2020, they still had 3 left unsold. The car was just a total commercial flop. And when it came out, no one wanted one. Lexus was simply not known for making supercars, and many felt like they should have just left that job to Ferrari or Lamborghini. They came out of nowhere, creating the most expensive Japanese car on the market, and the price played a huge role in the sales disaster that this car became. When the LFA first came out, it was priced at $375,000, and that's without any options. The price put them well above some natural competitors to the car, and this created a huge issue. Why would anyone buy a supercar from a company that's unproven in that arena and spend more money for it? So the LFA fell flat on its face, even with journalists calling it one of the best cars ever made. Today though, it's become a legend in the car world, and the company is actually working on a new version. You also might be surprised to know that the LFA isn't the first example of a Japanese car builder making something crazy. The OG was actually the Toyota 2000 GT, and oh my god, it's probably one of the most beautiful cars ever produced. And it's a recipe very similar to the LFA. First, they never made a cent on the car, even after selling 400 of them. The engine was made by Yamaha. Car journalists loved it, even comparing it against the Porsche 911. And of course, it came from a company no one would ever expect to build something like it. At the time, Toyota was making affordable and quite simple cars, honestly. But then bam, here's a random sports car that's somehow better than anything else out there. Sadly though, the 2000 GT also shares the LFA's sales performance, as in it didn't sell, really, at all. Like I said, they did manage to get around 400 out the door, but not many were interested in a sports car from a company who wasn't known for building them. Those who did get one, and somehow still have it, have done pretty well, as they're worth well into the millions these days. Another car that's gone up in value is the Lamborghini Muira. Now, we all know Lamborghini as the maker of 2-seater mid-engine supercars, but when the company was first getting off the ground, it was mostly building Grand Tourers, like the 350 GTV and the 400 GT. It wasn't until an engineering team at the company started quietly working on the Muira that the entire brand shifted. While being designed, Ferruccio Lamborghini himself was actually not in favor of building the mid-engine supercar, and even when he stubbornly agreed to make it, he really only viewed it as a good marketing tool. Now, unlike the LFA and the 2000 GT, the Muira only faced internal pushback. Once it was out to the public, it was very quickly a success, as it was the fastest car at the time and the first true supercar. Lamborghini made a wilder car though, the LM002. This is probably one of the craziest switch-ups from a company that no one saw coming. At this point, the Muira's already been out, and Lamborghini is in full supercar swing. But then, randomly, they start selling a military SUV. The original concept was called the Cheetah, and the aim was to actually sell it to the US military. But they had no interest, unsurprisingly, although it is cool, but they had no interest, and they went with the Hummer. So, Lamborghini, not sure what to do with their new concept, decides to sell it to the public. They switch up the engine, turn it into a luxury car, and there you have it, the very first luxury SUV from a performance car brand. And if you thought the car itself was wild, the engine choices were even wilder. Get this, you had the option to get a Lamborghini V12, which sounds like the best option, until you hear about the second one, a V12 engine out of a Class 1 powerboat. It's just insane. And even with the cool engine, the car was pretty heavily criticized. Even with the criticism though, Lamborghini did manage to sell a few hundred of them to wealthy rulers around the globe. And the LM002 was the start to a huge trend that's in full swing today. Just look at the Urus, or Ferrari's new SUV, the Purosangue. The LM002 paved the way for the super SUV, but it did have a little help from another company, Porsche. Before the 2000s, Porsche was a sports car company. Now you could argue that Porsche is still a sports car company, but you might actually be kind of wrong about that. Look, I love Porsche, and they build amazing cars. But most of the cars that they actually sell are SUVs. Just like the Urus and the Purosangue, these SUV sales help cover the cost of building more interesting cars. And Porsche was the first to do this at scale. The first Cayenne, which came out in 2002, was met with very mixed reviews. People were surprised the company was building a big car and were genuinely skeptical. Some also thought it was ugly, which, to be honest, I can sort of see. But many quickly realized the car was actually very good. Compared to most SUVs, it was quick, handled decently well, and was very comfortable. So, the LM002 may have paved the way for the modern sporty SUV, but the Cayenne showed the model of how to actually do it. Today, the SUV trend is huge, but there's an even bigger trend than that, and it's electric cars. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of electric cars, but there's no denying that it's a huge thing these days. Now, many would argue that Tesla is the big game changer, and that's true. They were really the first to do it at large scale. Some others may argue that it was the Prius, as it was the first great hybrid car, which gave way to cars like Tesla. But the first modern electric car was actually a total disaster. In 1996, GM came out with the EV1, a two-door futuristic electric car. And it was a very surprising car. Many people weren't a fan. It was just too early for electric cars. But the people who did end up driving them absolutely loved them. The only issue was they weren't actually allowed to buy them. Every EV1 was out on a lease agreement as some kind of real-world test. Even GM itself felt as though electric cars were probably unprofitable and not worth building. So they actually ended up deciding to crush every single one of them. And any car that they couldn't crush was donated to museums and deactivated. Many accused GM of sabotaging their own program, and they also believe the oil industry likely got in the way in order to protect itself from a rising popularity of electric vehicles. Hard to say, but what isn't hard to say is that the EV1 was an absolute trailblazer for the electric car world. Now, like we said, electric cars are super popular today. There's a type of car that's been popular for way longer, and it's pickup trucks. Let's shoot back to 1978. At this time, there are loads of emission regulations, but Dodge just found a loophole. Trucks don't need to pass any emissions. So they throw a massive engine into a small truck and create the Lil Red Express, a genuine Corvette slayer. It actually posted the fastest 0 to 100 time as tested by Car and Driver for that year. Now, it was a very niche car and was only around for 2 model years, but the idea carried on. This gave way to more strange trucks, like in 1991 when GMC created the Syclone, or in 1998 when Ford produced the F-150 SVT Lightning. Both were high-performance light-duty trucks that could absolutely rip. Take the Syclone, for example. It had a turbocharged V6, and when it came out, it beat a Ferrari in an acceleration and braking test. These trucks didn't sell well because they were met with a ton of resistance from normal buyers. Most people just want a truck that can haul their stuff, not a truck to take to the drag strip. But these cars have become icons and they changed the game. Today, the performance truck category is strong, with vehicles like the F-150 Raptor R or the TRX, a supercharged V8 truck that makes over 707 horsepower. And that leads us to another V8 American car, the Ford GT. Now, the original GT40 race car has its own story, but in 2005, Ford brought back the name for a street car. Ford hadn't really built a supercar, but this thing could easily compete with Ferraris and Lamborghinis of the early 2000s. Just like the LFA though, it struggled to sell. Ford simply wasn't known for building cars like this, and people would rather spend their hard-earned money on an Italian supercar that was already proven to be good. Not many people were willing to take the risk, but those who did realized just how great the car actually was. And today, it's paved the way for a second generation and became a prized collector's item. Want to see more videos like this one? Make sure you subscribe.